So, last night I was lucky enough to see the first 3 episodes of Bleach the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Core 4, The Calamity, in my local cinema. Well, it wasn't really my local cinema, I had to travel about an hour to catch a showing, but there was an encouraging number of people there, and I think they had multiple screenings across multiple days too, which is really cool. I mean, needless to say, it was weirdly surreal getting to see and experience Bleach in the cinema with like-minded fans. Now, as I live in the UK, there wasn't any hollering or cheering, but there was a palpable sense of excitement, and I was trying to gauge the reaction in the room as best I could, but in reality, I was pretty much totally transfixed from start to finish myself. And so anyway, today I wanted to chat with you guys about episodes 1 through 3 of Core 4, or 41, 42, and 43 of the Thousand Year Blood War arc overall, and give some in-depth thoughts and impressions, as I wasn't able to take down notes on my phone until after the showing, and obviously couldn't take any pictures during. I'm just going to be going off what I remember for the most part. So this isn't really going to be that formal. I've jotted down some talking points that I want to try and cover, and I want to try to take as holistic a look as possible at the episodes, while also drilling down deep into the nitty-gritty at certain points as well. I feel like the best way for me to cover the episodes is actually to discuss them fight by fight, and bear in mind too that this will be a full spoiler discussion, though we are going to do a small spoiler-free part at the start. Before we continue, if you enjoy Bleach videos like this every single week, I do put a lot of work into these, so please do check out my Patreon in the link down in the description below. Your help is greatly appreciated, and it really does help. It helps enormously. Any level of support over there, again, it does mean the absolute world. So a huge shout out to everyone who is supporting me over on Patreon, and again, if you do want to help support over there, it is greatly appreciated, so thank you all so very much. And so, like I said, before we get into the spoiler part of the video, first some overall spoiler-free thoughts of the episodes, and if you want to bow out after that, obviously you can. To cut to the chase, I was really, really impressed. To the point where I was kind of blown away. The quality on show feels extremely high to me. As someone who has pored over every single episode of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, I mean, Core 3 was already very impressive. You know, it felt like a significant jump, certainly from Core 2, but there is such a fluidity of motion and action in these episodes alone, and it's so consistent throughout as well. There's so much of that fluidity. It outclasses what's come before. And not only that, but the ambition on show I thought was awesome. That was one of my favourite things about it. You can really see where the significant time has gone into producing this. And it does feel like they've gone all out as well. And I have to emphasise, I love that ambition. You know, there are a bunch of shots here that are so visually cool and interesting. They could have been handled in such a boring way, but they're not. And it's so far removed from just feeling like static images with a bit of movement here and there. I know it's cliche to say, but some of this really felt movie quality to me. Certain parts in particular that I'll get into in the spoiler section. And the overall art quality as well was pretty stellar across the board. Episodes 1 and 2 in particular looked basically immaculate. Although again, the motion, the action in episode 3 was on par with those, and again it felt very ambitious in places. I think the actual art was a little wonkier. It was still great, but it was a bit more like episode 39 of Core 3, as opposed to the likes of episode 33 or 40, which had again incredible, you know, almost Kubo level art in comparison. Regarding the pacing, the content, it felt to me like they crammed a hell of a lot in here. It didn't feel rushed per se, and I kind of think that's down to the structure of the episodes, and such is the result of how few chapters we have remaining. But they did cover a lot, to the point where I was kind of left thinking, we might have this wrapped up by like episode 10. There was a very brief recap of the end of Core 3, but more importantly, there was a fair bit of new content as well, which again we'll get into in a moment. But interestingly, they covered fairly substantially all 4 of the remaining fights in these first 3 episodes. It isn't structured as formulaic isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. It isn't structured like Mairi versus Pernida and Kyoraku versus Lige were. It feels like there's a lot more going on all the time right from the get-go. Considering the episodes were essentially just smashed together to form a 60-minute or so block, it was a little difficult to figure out where one episode ended and another began, though I think I know. And of course there were the title drops and the midpoint cards as well. But for the most part, everything in the last trailer we got was from these episodes, as expected. So there's still 75% or so of the core we have no idea about, which is that's very exciting. Anyway, that's really all I have to say that's spoiler-free. And I want to get into the meat of this video. So yeah, on the whole, I was extremely impressed. Very happy. And I'm very sad that I now have to wait so long for episode 4, though I will more than happily rewatch these when they come out, trust me. Before we continue into the spoiler section of the video, do consider hitting subscribe down below if you like these kinds of videos. Help us on our journey to reach 300,000 subs. It's only possible with your help, and I really would appreciate it. So please consider hitting that button today. Alright, but if you're still here, that means either you've seen the episodes as well, or you don't care about spoilers, because now we're going to get into it. So, these episodes covered roughly chapter 658 to, I think, 675. From what I can tell, Ichigo releasing the Horn of Salvation is the farthest point from the manga that these episodes cover. And like I said earlier, we are kind of all over the place at this point with the actual content coverage anyway. So like I said, I think the easiest way for me to tackle this video, because of course we're looking at 3 episodes in one, is to go fight by fight. And so up first, we have Kisuke Urahara and Yoruichi Shihoin versus Askin Naklavar, which runs in the manga from chapter 662 to 666, and the entire thing is covered here. Now the fight is kind of split into 2 parts, both here and in the manga, Yoruichi versus Askin, and then Urahara versus Askin, so let's tackle the Yoruichi half first of all. Now, I actually don't have too much to say about this part, mostly because it's very faithful to the manga. There's very little here that's actually been added or changed in any tangible way. Obviously, it looks amazing. Yoruichi's Kokubyo Senki form was done real justice here, even if I wish narratively the form was handled a little differently. There's no denying on the screen it looks great. And I was surprised to see how kind of hard they went with the fan service, especially considering how the anime has kind of been about that so far. And yes, that panel is included here, which again kind of surprised me. Yoruichi's form was completely unfettered in its approach, and they even went beyond that, to be honest, at points. The lighting was really awesome. Yoruichi's lightning effects looked and sounded fantastic, and again, that fluidity was here right from the off. Really, the only new segment in this fight that I could identify was that moment from the trailer where she kind of smacks Askin around the tower, and again, that did look great. But for me, the fight I was really looking forward to was Kisuke versus Askin. In fact, those of you who have been watching me for a while will probably know that this was the fight I was the most excited to see. The fight they absolutely had to get right. And look, I'll just be honest with you. They completely crushed it. Oh my god, it's so good. It is so good. They went above and beyond for this fight. And I'll just say it right now. This is by far the best looking part of the first 3 episodes. When I said earlier that there are movie quality sections here, this is one of them. This was the pinnacle, in my opinion, of both the art, which looks basically ripped from the manga, but also the quality and just how fluid and amazing it all was to experience. It's so good. I can't believe it. The lighting was awesome. Askin's Volsten dish looks fantastic, and as soon as he activates the Gift Ball Deluxe, it drenches the battlefield in both purple and green light. The green light is from that ability, which I thought was kind of weird, but it does work. The music was incredible. There's at least one new vocal track that plays as Askin unleashes Haschwalth, as well as, of course, the church bell motif that totally sold that moment as being really sinister and great. And interestingly, I've always thought his form was pronounced Haschane, but he actually says Hashein, which is cool too. But yeah, everything about this fight, I'm losing my voice already, was a total showstopper. They went way harder on this battle than they needed to, than I honestly expected, and I'm so grateful for it. Because this was the one fight I could not wait to see. And so maybe I'm biased, but I genuinely think it's hard to argue that this was like the most incredible part of the episodes. Askin looks awesome. When he moves, he generates like a molecular path under him, which does happen in the manga, but it just looks and sounds so cool here, and it happens kind of all the time here as well, whereas it didn't really in the manga. The build-up and execution of even things like Askin setting up the gift Bereich, where he holds out his arms and the orbs on his arms turn into these huge molecular nodes that fire off into the sky. It's so fluid, and unleashing Gift Ring. It's like my jaw was on the floor, basically from start to finish. But of course, we're all really here for one thing, right? How does Kisuke Urahara's bankai, Kanon Biraki Benihime Aratame, stack up? And again, I am so pleased to report that not only did they totally nail it, they got it completely right, but again, they went above and beyond. I'll just get it out of the way. This fight does receive a fairly substantial extension. It could stand to be even longer still, but it is extended nicely. Thank God. That's like exactly what I wanted, because it is criminally short in the manga. A lot of the extension is really kind of focused on the presentation aspect of the fight. So I've bemoaned before the fact that while Kisuke's bankai is my favourite bankai in Bleach, it is pretty clear that by this point Kubo was already starting to rush things a bit. You know, you only have to compare the setup, the build-up, to Kyoraku's bankai in the manga in comparison to Kisuke's bankai in the manga. Benihime basically just pops up out of nowhere, while Kyoraku gets, effectively, an entire half a chapter of build-up for his bankai alone. But that is not the case in the anime, thankfully, and it is so awesome. It gets the fanfare and the build-up it deserves. So, Kisuke activates bankai after having his eye destroyed by Askin. Again, that whole sequence is perfect here in the anime. And things immediately get really creepy. There's like this crank sound going on in the background that sounds like someone turning a crank or something, because I think it's supposed to be someone behind the scenes moving Benihime, the puppet, as it crawls along the floor. And it's so awesome because you get this first-person perspective from Benihime herself as she drags herself towards Kisuke from behind. And it turns out as soon as Kisuke says the words bankai, this black curtain falls behind him, and then she emerges from it. You see her face appear behind the curtain, obscured but visible, initially as she kind of presses into it. It looks cool as hell. And then she opens the curtain with her wooden hand and emerges, and that's when I was struggling to contain myself in the cinema, because I was sitting there like, this is exactly what I wanted to see. I was so happy. I was so happy with it. And in the interview with Kubo, Taguchi, and Murata that played afterwards, they specifically said that they wanted to nail down the creepy horror vibe with this bankai. And I'm sitting there like, yes, hell yes, and it works. I think there is a CG element being used, but honestly, it wasn't really noticeable at all. It's absolutely combined with hand-drawn animation, and it all looked fantastic to me. In my opinion, Pernida really does still stick out like a sore thumb, no pun intended, in the Varvelt arc so far as being the only use of CG that I've not really liked at all. So that was amazing, but things only get better from here. Like I said, the fight is extended. Kisuke fixes his eyes, just as he does in the manga, and engages Askin, just as he does in the manga. And it looks amazing. But then, after restructuring his hand and sending Askin flying, he then begins to skate around the battlefield to catch up to where Askin has been flung to, and he does so by riding Benehime's stitches like a roller coaster. And again, there's this amazing, clopping of wood sound effect going on at the same time. You get this, again, incredible fluidity as Kisuke literally rides the rails, weaving throughout the buildings, and a couple of wonderful shots of him rising up above the entire cityscape. It's kind of interesting because while cool, I feel like this isn't really how the bankai works, but it's just Kisuke utilizing it in a different and unexpected way. Again, showing its near unmatched versatility. He's not even using the power to restructure anything here. And again, this is based off that one panel of Kisuke slashing Askin where, as we've noted before, the stitches are following him through the air and yet nothing seems to happen with them. Well, again, in the interview, Kubo noted how that is supposed to be showcasing Kisuke zipping forward using the stitches, and that is now taken up a notch here. But yeah, like I said, the fight is extended. Kisuke and Askin clash a couple more times than they do in the manga. Askin actually lands a hit on him and sends Urahara flying, while he also conjures an army of gift balls, basically. And again, we get to see something I really wanted to see, which is Kisuke using his bankai to restructure his foot, which is new, to better dodge and escape the gift balls. Again, I was so happy to see it. So I can't emphasize enough, clearly, how fantastic this sequence was. It was easily the highlight of the 3 episodes for me. And again, I know I'm biased, but they totally just knocked it out of the park. Again, would I have liked it to have been a little longer still? Sure. But that's just me being greedy at that point. They've already lavished it in quality that I just didn't expect. It's the best looking part of the 3 episodes. The best sounding, the music, the sound effects are brilliant. It's all brought to life perfectly. And again, like I said, throughout from start to finish, the art is the highest quality across these episodes. The only thing I was a bit surprised about was the fact that there is no flashback for Kisuke and Yoruichi, which I was pretty certain was a lock. Kubo has gone on record before saying he wanted to add it to the manga but couldn't. And I guess they couldn't find the space here either. Like I said earlier, having watched the episodes is not too surprising, as they really do cram a lot in and you can feel the squeeze, but still, it is a surprise. But the fight ends in the same way. Grimjo takes Askin out. Askin's gift ball deluxe goes haywire and threatens to kill Urahara and everyone else inside, and then Nell rushes to rescue them. Interestingly though, Kisuke's final line is changed ever so slightly. He still says as he bleeds out that he will leave everything to Ichigo and Rukia, but then he also adds everyone at the end as well, which I think was done to take away from the weirdness of the fact that he specifies Rukia, which kind of, I think, made people speculate that she would have a role yet to play, and she doesn't really. Now it's Mr. Kurosaki, Miss Kuchiki, everyone. And that just makes more sense because he obviously has a past relationship with Rukia, which is why he specifies her, but he's not now just laying it squarely on her shoulders randomly either. He's talking to everyone, he's just specifying those two at the start. But yeah, on the whole, I already loved this fight in the manga, and it is totally superior in the anime in every way. Oh, and there was one other nice detail where, when Grimjo punches through Askin and rips his heart out, in the anime, Askin's blue vein is going crazy as though it's trying to defend the area, but obviously it's way too late. Also, Askin's voice actor, Shunsuke Takeuchi, incredible job, really fantastic. I have virtually zero complaints about this, to be honest. They would be the most minor of nitpicks. Things like when Kisuke is beginning to die at the end, essentially, they don't show the stitches on his arm reopening. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because that's why he's bleeding out. They don't really show that, which I thought was kind of weird. But I do like the fact that when Kisuke's bankai, when Benehime collapses behind him in the anime, it actually disappears, which is proof, of course, that he is literally on death's door. Another thing that I think is maybe a little weird is the fact that they don't elaborate on Grimjo's contract with Urahara, which I thought they might do, but the line is exactly the same as it is in the manga, where Grimjo just kind of says, "Our deal is done, defeating your enemy was the extent of our contract." We don't know what Grimjo gets out of said contract, we have literally no idea. It could have been a throwaway line about Kisuke saying, "Okay, I won't kill you now," or, "Okay, I'll arrange for a fight with Ichigo." It's going to be one of the two, but We don't find out, and I thought that was kind of weird, but it doesn't matter. I was totally in love, and I was enraptured by the episode at this point. I thought it was fantastic. Now, I think the first episode ends with Askin activating his Volston dish, and then he dies at the halfway point of the following episode. So the whole fight, encompassing the Yoruichi portion, is about a full episode in total, which isn't bad at all. Moving on, let's bring it down a notch. Flip the scale somewhat, and check out what I would say was probably the most disappointing element from these 3 episodes, I guess. And that's the Vizard and the captains versus Gerard. Let's rip the band-aid off immediately. Yes, the Vizard are completely useless and achieve nothing, which is totally absurd to me, I'm sorry, to the point where I don't even know why you would bother with such a tease at the end of episode 40. Episode 41, by the way, opens with a really wonderful... Well, it actually opens with Yhwach's dream, which, by the way, is interesting because he doesn't look like his younger self in the dream here. In the manga, he looked like his younger self. Here, he just looks like pre-almighty Yhwach getting slashed by original Shikai Ichigo. But anyway, it also opens with this ambitious and fantastic shot that takes us all across Varvelt in one take, and shows us all the fights underway, as well as the deceased Basby, which I thought was interesting. And again, in the interview afterwards, they said they chose to do this because it was a good way of recapping what's happened in a way that was visually interesting and new, and I couldn't agree more. I think it was fantastic. But it was awesome seeing the gigantic Gerard passing by him and moving through the Vizard group, who were all lined up and ready to fight. It was really ambitious, again, like I said, and it was really cool. But as soon as we returned to the Vizard in episode 3, I think it was, and the episode opened on Kenpachi emerging from Mayuri's tank already, I knew it was over. I knew it was over from them as soon as I saw that. And when their scene opened immediately on that section from the manga, from chapter 658, where they're all taken out by Gerard, I was like, oh no. I was like, oh no, they're about to be screwed over. And they kind of are. You know, don't get me wrong, it is extended. Shinji uses Sakanade to confuse Gerard. I like the fact that Gerard is excited at seeing the flipped world, by the way. And he misses Shinji, who then stabs Gerard in the back of the neck, which was pretty cool. Meanwhile, Rose uses his Shikai to stab Gerard too, while Kensei uses Bankai to attack him. Honestly, I don't even remember what Mashiro does, but then Hiyori, Lisa, Love, and Hachi all just play out their moment from the manga, where they jump Gerard all at once in a huge explosion. After this, they all gather for what is admittedly a very cool moment. All 8 members of the Vizard fire Sero at the same time. They're all different colours in this rainbow of glittering energy, which does look awesome, but it's over in a flash, and it achieves nothing. Gerard just emerges from the smoke, laughing at them, and wipes them all out in one hit with his outstretched arm. So in that sense, it's even worse than it was in the manga, because he doesn't even use his shield to defend himself, and he also now takes out 8 of them at once. I mean, that kinda sucks. Like, why even bother? Why even bother bringing Rose and Kensei back? Why bother bringing Mashiro back? Also, this, I would think, confirms that Soifon is just down for the count. There's no sign of her anywhere, so her stupidly attacking Gerard from the front with her Bankai maybe seems to have been their way of writing her out, which is better than forgetting about her, but unless she returns, which is totally possible, I guess, that's pretty embarrassing for her as well. There was also a small moment where Rukia and Renji are shown kind of stirring on the floor, so maybe they'll get up a little earlier, I don't know, or it's just meant to be foreshadowing the fact that they do get back on their feet. Anyway, the Multi-Sero, it's very awesome, but again, it does absolutely nothing. It has basically the exact same non-impact that Shinji's Senju Koten Taiho had. So it's like, what are we doing here? What are these guys doing? And then Kenpachi arrives and just cuts his arm off like it's butter. And I'm like, really? The Vizard kind of managed to hurt Gerard a little bit, but again, like I said, I honestly wonder why even bother with the tease in Core 3 when this is what you're setting up. There's no bankai from Love. Love does nothing here that he doesn't do in the manga. My only hope is that maybe some of them aren't actually down for the count. As Hitsugaya gets involved, we get the moment from chapter 659 where Hinamori watches him activate bankai, but here she's not carrying Shinji like she is doing in the manga, so maybe he's still around somewhere, though I kinda doubt it. I hope so, but I'm not convinced, let's put it that way. Anyway, speaking of Hitsugaya, we get a bit of the captain's trio versus Gerard, but not a huge amount. I think it's literally just some of chapter 666 and some of 667. It's obviously pretty cool seeing Kenpachi unleash Nozarashi again, and him clashing with Gerard's Hoffnung is awesome too. And actually there's a nice new moment where once Kenpachi is slashed across the stomach by Hoffnung's special ability, which actually is the end of chapter 667, both Hitsugaya and Byakuya actually move to attack Gerard, and they manage to land a combination strike on him, but he blocks it with his blade, which then chips and wounds both of them as well, which I really liked. Partly because it always felt like Byakuya barely gets involved in this fight, but also because they needed to take a bit more damage from what should be an almost impossible battle, and now they've both been slashed as well. I was wondering in the cinema if we might reach all the way to Kenpachi's bankai, but alas, not yet. By the looks of things, that will be episode 4. If you're not a manga reader, the third episode kind of ended in a weird and anticlimactic way, I would say. It ended with a shot of one of Hitsugaya's ice petals crumbling. But of course, knowing what we do, it is not surprising that they emphasized it so much. To be honest, at the speed we're moving, if they spend all of episode 4 focusing on Gerard, accounting for any new scenes, I think they could honestly cover his entire fight then and there. So there's nothing too crazy going on with Gerard just yet. That's probably still to come. We've only scratched the surface. Now again, this was the episode where the art was noticeably a little more up and down. It still looks great. It didn't look quite as clean as Kisuke vs. Askin, which could have been ripped straight from the pages of the manga, but it still looked great and flowed really well too. Gerard's arm returning after being cut off looked great, bathed in gold, and I'm really excited to see the rest of that showdown, honestly. Also, the jokes between Byakuya and Hitsugaya, they're still here as well. So yeah, not much else to say about this one just yet, but it was a lot of fun already. Next, though, we're going to talk about arguably the biggest fight of the bunch. Uryu versus Haschwalth. Look, I'm just going to level with you. This is crazy. From the word go, this is a totally brand new fight, and it never lets up. So far, Uryu vs. Haschwalth has spanned all 3 episodes, and shows no sign of being close to over either. Uryu releases his full Volston dish immediately, which does mean it is a pretty noticeable mistake when they reuse that moment from episode 33 when he conjures the gigantic arrow and is not in his full Volston dish. That was a little bit weird to see, because it's the only moment when he isn't. But he tries to counter Haschwalth the Almighty by overwhelming him with the sheer number of his arrowheads, basically saying it doesn't matter if Haschwalth can see the future if there's literally no room to evade anyway. But Haschwalth kind of proves the power of his eyes by dodging through them anyway, and again, this is such a kinetic sequence. The movement and fluidity on show is insane. Haschwalth closes the gap by launching his sword at Uryu before leaping forwards and pinning him to the wall. Honestly, so much happens in this fight that I can't remember every little detail. I know I'll miss something, but it was wonderful to see. Haschwalth eventually forces Uryu downwards, smashing the two of them through multiple floors to end up where we see them in the trailer, laid out on a ledge outstretched over a huge rift now appearing in the sky. And again, we're flying through everything we've seen from them in the trailers alone, so whatever else they're hiding, it's brand new, and that's very exciting. But this was also a really cool moment because Haschwalth once again details their ultimate plan. And in a cool twist, this has been their plan from the very start, and they've been working on it from the very start. Again, if you've been following along with my 1000 Year Blood War arc anime journey, You'll know a real lack of discernible motivation for Yhwach was a big, big problem, and the anime has been making a real effort to fix that. Here, Haschwalth reveals that the collapse of the three worlds is Yhwach's true wish, and that everything has been for this. Right back at the start of the arc, where they destabilized the worlds by killing all those hollows, to focusing on taking out extremely strong Shinigami like Yamamoto and the Zero Division, and then eventually killing the Soul King, it has all been for this. Perhaps most fascinating of all, however, was the fact that at long last, there seems to be something going on with that red orb in the centre of Varvelt. Considering the context in which it was shown, now I might be going off the reservation here a bit, but my new theory for this, I reckon that's a doorway to the primordial world, built from the destabilization and the tearing of the worlds they've already caused to date. And they're adding to it and adding to it by causing more and more disruption, until eventually maybe it'll envelop and take the place of the worlds. That thing will be the ticking time bomb that everyone is trying to outrun. That's just my newest guess based on the fact that it was shown explicitly while Haschwalth talked about collapsing the worlds and what Yhwach's true wish is. But of course Uryu fights back, and I already much prefer that to how he's portrayed in the manga, where he's essentially completely useless in the face of Haschwalth's overwhelming skill. Like I said, we never even see Haschwalth using the Almighty in the manga, but here, Uryu is battling him even while he's wielding that power. Uryu sends Haschwalth flying upwards by unleashing a torrent of his arrowheads once more with his hand, even managing to land a few hits on the Grand Master, slashing him a couple of times as Haschwalth is forced upwards. But interestingly, we see Haschwalth wielding the black Reiatsu of the Soul King himself, enveloping his sword in it and using it to destroy Uryu's arrows, revealing that he can in fact tap into the full power of the king. As Yhwach's other half, he reveals that he was essentially born to do so, to wield the Soul King's strength like this. And, speaking of which, yes, something pretty crazy does happen. Haschwalth reveals a brand new form of his own. All of this within the first 3 episodes, explaining to Uryu that he has much more control over the Soul King's power than we first thought. Haschwalth's eyes suddenly drip a black liquid which runs down his face, while the Soul King's own black energy drapes itself over and around his shoulders like a scarf, as well as running down his sword. Now, in the interview with Kubo and the team afterwards, they basically explained that this is Haschwalth having unlocked the full power of the Almighty, though that still doesn't seem to include changing the future. And this is basically in lieu of him actually having a Volstendish. And that kind of makes sense to me. Taguchi even mentioned wanting to give Haschwalth a Volstendish, only to remember he can't command Reishi. Now, that's a little weird, because while we technically know that is the truth, he has been shown to be able to do so, such as when he breaks down Nanao's barrier, and in the manga, when he launches an energy arc at Uryu. Now, to be totally fair, that energy arc scene hasn't been animated yet, and we don't know if it ever will be. I'm leaning towards no. But the scene of him breaking down Nanao's barrier was in the anime, so that's kind of odd. But this form does look really awesome, and it's again just such an unfathomable difference from the manga. I mean, this fight is totally unrecognizable in the best possible way. They are completely rewriting it. There's nothing from the manga here at all yet. Maybe there will be later on. But right now, this is blazing its own path, and it's all the better for it. Uryu continues to try and fight Haschwalth, but the dark power of the Soul King is proving too much at this point. There's an absolutely fantastic, and again, fairly ambitious sequence where Uryu uses his arrowheads to form a cage around himself, which Haschwalth then assaults with streams of black energy, very similar to what we see Yhwach doing. The cage is relentlessly tossed about the place before being destroyed and Uryu injured, and it feels like at this point we're reaching Uryu's limit, while Haschwalth heals his wounds thanks to the Soul King's power. Again, I remember thinking in the cinema that there's no way Ryuken isn't showing up, surely. This fight feels tailor-made at this point for an intervention of some kind, and it would be, of course, brilliant to see, especially if Ryuken has like a Volston dish or something like that. Anyway, Haschwalth also teases out Uryu's survival of the Owlsvalen again, so I imagine the revelations about that will be arriving in the future. And again, if Katagiri's fate is discussed here, maybe that will include Ryuken being present. But there isn't too much else to say. I mean, I love Haschwalth's characterization here. He feels more like a villain than ever, and he finally really feels like an endgame boss. They're really, truly having a fight, and it's fantastic to see. The shot where Haschwalth is pressing the tip of his blade against Uryu's glasses and it drags along the lens, leaving a scratch, is so cool and again so dynamic. And it kind of feels like the fight still has a lot of gas left in the tank too, so I do wonder how long this thing might last. But perhaps the most crucial element is the fact that based on what I've seen so far, I can't help but think the ending will be drastically different. Even if the actual ending itself is the same, and I'm not sure it will be, the journey taken to get there is totally new. But before we move on to the final fight to talk about today, there's actually something extremely cool that links these two fights in an explicit way. And that's the sinister new lore and potential story threads we get given to us by both Haschwalth and Yhwach. This feels like a pretty huge deal to me, one that has the potential to maybe alter the ending of the series in some way. At the very least, I would be amazed if it didn't dictate something that we see in the ending, and that's the fate of the Soul King once the battle is over. Now, there are no flashbacks for the Soul King just yet. I'm still hoping we get to see that. But both Yhwach and Haschwalth draw attention to the Soul King, to the fact that Yhwach himself is now the Soul King, and that if the heroes succeed in killing him, they will destroy the world. The anime has a nice callback, I think, to Renji vs. Byakuya, where he and Ichigo were shown side by side with the same resolve driving them. The same thing essentially happens here with Ichigo and Uryu as they resolve to kill the world, if that's what it takes to protect that which they care about. This rather pertinent conundrum was just completely glossed over in the manga, as I've said before. Yhwach is killed without a care for the consequences, and then the new Soul King just wasn't revealed at all in the epilogue. It took a light novel to finally tell us what was going on. As far as we were concerned, the worlds should have collapsed with Yhwach's death, but that just doesn't happen, and everything is hunky-dory with no explanation. Here, though, they are really diving into that idea, and they go even further with it than I expected. Yhwach reveals to Ichigo that he is a Soul King candidate, and that Ichibei has been planning to make Ichigo the new Soul King all along, ever since they first met, when Ichibei tells Ichigo that the reason they're taking him back to the royal palace is different from the rest. Of course, we've always taken that to mean fixing Ichigo's bankai, but now the anime is implying it's because Ichibei was scheming to make Ichigo the new Soul King from the start. There's been a lot of discussion around whether Ichibei is evil or not, but make no mistake, Core 4 really wants you to suspect this guy. We actually get to see Ichibei again, which is fantastic because this is totally new. He just vanishes in the manga, and well, this time he's certainly up to something. In another pretty huge reveal, Yhwach and Haschwalth reveal that black is the power of chaos, the colour without colour, and that, yes, black is literally the Soul King's own Reiatsu. Now, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting that wrong. I might still be somewhat delirious from seeing it in the cinema, and then basically not sleeping. But this seems pretty huge, to be honest, and it kind of seems to me like the implication was that Ichibei is controlling the Soul King's power. And to be fair, there's a precedent for that. He was wielding the left arm 1,000 years ago. But we see Ichibe, again looking incredibly suspicious, in the room where the Zero Division's Blood Oath seal is, and he uses Ichimonji to draw a ring from which a black salamander appears. The inky salamander then slithers along his shoulders before placing itself in a bowl from which Ichibe then drinks, very similarly to the chant for Futentai Satsuryo. Again, what is going on here? I think there are two answers that come to mind. Either Ichibe is reviving the Zero Division, hence why he's in this room, or, more likely in my opinion, he is restoring his own power after being revived by Ichigo earlier. From what I remember, the Blood Oath seals themselves are now empty. And that's kind of interesting, actually, because I'm looking at the screenshot now from episode 27, after Senjumaru is killed. We can see the 4 Blood Oath seals still have the individual emblems on them for the Zero Division, but Senjumaru's also is projected on the back one, presumably because she was able to activate her bankai, but her bankai has now been burned through. From what I remember, all of the seals are blank now, so I'm assuming it's possible that Ichibe has taken the ink from these seals to then create this salamander? So is he meant to be sapping the end of their life force to restore his own power? And then, of course, he can bring them back, I guess, as we see in Can't Fear Your Own World. I don't know, it's kind of weird, but again, like I said, the most likely option, in my opinion, is he's restoring his own power after having been revived by Ichigo earlier. But there definitely seems to be an implication that Ichibe can use the Soul King's power, or has control over it. As I said, we see in the past he uses the left arm, and has perhaps made things that way as a result of what happened to Adnias in the past. Yhwach flat out tells Ichigo that Ichibe wants to keep things the way they are, keep the status quo where the Shinigami rule the universe, and that he wanted to sacrifice Ichigo to do so. At the same time, Haschwalth tells Uryu that again at the end of their plan, Yhwach wants to create a monarchy for the Quincy and the Quincy alone, which again is kind of interesting because that's never outright said in the manga again. I mean, there aren't really any Quincy left at this point, it kind of feels like, but that seems to be the idea. Or at least that's what Haschwalth thinks is the idea. Anyway, basically what I'm getting at is, could this be laying the groundwork for something even bigger than we might think? Is there a future being set up by this exchange where there's a bit of a twist ending and Ichibe tries to make Ichigo the new Soul King after Yhwach is killed? And maybe everyone kind of stands up against him or something like that. It kind of feels like that's where things are headed. The idea that Ichibe has been up to no good is one that has thoroughly permeated the anime so far. You know, Kyoraku has said that he doesn't trust Ichibe, that he knows the monk is up to something. I think that was all the way back in like episode 14, and now kind of catches him saying it, and he says, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Mayuri, in the episode where Yhwach makes it to the royal palace, wonders what Ichibe is up to, and he says again that, what kind of plan does the Zero Division have, and Ichibe looks really sinister. In episode 24, Tenjiro says that the stain from Ichibe, from the black of Ichibe's power, is not one that will ever wash away. There is definitely an undercurrent, in the anime in particular, that Ichibe is up to something bad. And I think they might be setting up a new ending here. I don't know how long it would last, I don't know how long a conflict would last, but it kind of feels like they are going to have a situation where Ichibe approaches Ichigo in the wake of Yhwach's death and is like, I'm making you the Soul King. And obviously that's not going to happen, so I don't know. It kind of feels like that's where things are headed. And honestly, I kind of love that. Ichibe is such a cool character, and the fact that the manga basically just threw him away in the end was a big shame. But also, Yhwach tells Ichigo this is the meaning of Ichibe's weird cryptic nature, when he says, after allowing Ichigo to go and face Yhwach, that that's what peace is. This is what peace is according to Ichibe, making Ichigo the new sacrificial lamb. Now, of course, in typical Ichigo fashion, he just brushes off this massive revelation and says that he doesn't care. But We'll see about that. Anyway, that was pretty huge, and thankfully tells me we probably aren't yet done with Adnias, Ichibe, and their past just yet. And like I said, I loved seeing Ichibe in the story again. He's too fascinating a character to just be forgotten. But that leads us to the final fight that we need to discuss today. This is a very long video, I apologise. Ichigo and Orihime versus Yhwach. And it really is Ichigo and Orihime, by the way. I think it is clear that she is the absolute standout of this fight so far, and I'm just as surprised as you to be saying that. Now, we've discussed a lot of the new lore reveals from the fight, but as for the fight itself, it's both similar to the manga so far, but also it is extended in some genuinely shocking ways. Ichigo flings himself at the Quincy King, and again I liked that there was an acknowledgement on Ichigo's behalf of the fact that Yhwach is now using the Soul King's power. Again, in the manga there's no doubt that once Yhwach absorbs Ryo's role is basically completely swept under the rug. Here, though, it's very much still a presence, it is palpable. There are, as with all of the fights so far, some really cool and visually exciting sequences, such as Ichigo rushing Yhwach as the camera kind of pans around, while the villain tries to blast him with power. And Yhwach himself even unleashes a new ability where he kind of sends black energy discs skimming through the air towards Ichigo. I will say I don't love the lighting in this fight, it's very overbearing, and I'm hoping once Ichigo uses Horn of Salvation and demolishes the ceiling of Silburn, things might look a little different, because right now I'm not feeling it, especially in comparison to the other fights going on at the moment. Like I said, I loved the lighting in Kisuke vs Askin, I really like the lighting in Uryu vs Haschwalth. The Gerard fight, it's fine, like I said, visually it's the least interesting so far, and this one, I'm not sure about it just yet, I need to see more. But anyway, Ichigo himself is plenty cool here. It is mostly par for the course, though. Ichigo's own involvement just isn't really changed up that much yet. He does unleash a new Getsuga show, as we see in the trailer, in what's again a pretty fantastic little moment where Yhwach basically calls him out for saying, you know what you have to do, but you know that if you do it, you will destroy the world, so you're not really giving it your all, which I thought was pretty cool. But this was really Orihime's showcase. She defends Ichigo from Yhwach's powers just as she does in the manga, but the craziest sequence comes when Yhwach uses his Reiatsu to pin her to the ground. It's very similar to what he does to Bazby in the Friend flashback, and you do get to see the Reiatsu effect again briefly, which was awesome. But incredibly, astoundingly, Orihime uses her own power to force Yhwach's Reiatsu back up into the sky, allowing her to stand up on her own. This feels like a genuinely unbelievable, in a good way, power-up for Orihime. And I like the idea too, because her powers are all about rejection, but also about trespassing upon God's own domain. She's quite literally rejecting God, or the closest thing to it in Bleach at this point. She's on his level, and that's frankly bonkers. I feel really sorry for Chad, because he has been completely left in the dust at this point, and we'll get to him in a moment. But there can be no denying Orihime's insane power now. And we get a great sequence where she both heals Ichigo behind her and repels Yhwach at the same time. And Ichigo kind of watches her from below as she lifts the pressure, with an almost heavenly glow gilding her from above. But I also like that Yhwach kind of recognizes this and doesn't pull his punches. Seeing Orihime's strength, he attacks her and she's smacked around in the sky, which again is kind of nuts to see, until Ichigo arrives to rescue her. And it's a real back and forth between the two of them, which feels like an actual team dynamic. She's holding her own better than ever before against the craziest foe possible, and she is more involved in this fight than ever before. And it's awesome, it's well deserved. There's even a brand new flashback showing Orihime and Tatsuki in what seems to be a greenhouse at their school, I think? Which is kind of weird, where Orihime looks at a fire lily and compares it to Ichigo's own heart. And it's cool too because the fire lily appeared in the first 1000-Year Blood War arc opening. Now in the moment in the cinema, the flashback felt completely random, as it came right between Askin's Volstendish reveal and then the return to that fight. But I think that's because it actually opens episode 2, so that will happen before the opening. It still is a bit of a weird placement, to be totally honest, but it makes more sense when you look at it like that. It does feel a bit like the anime is now focusing in on the relationship between Ichigo and Orihime because of what happens at the end of the arc, which we are rapidly closing in on. And actually, during this moment, I was watching thinking how weird it is that they will be married in a few short episodes. But with all that done, we return to the manga for one last hurrah as Ichigo unleashes his Horn of Salvation form from the cliffhanger of chapter 675. And like I said, I think this is the furthest point in the manga so far. It's kind of crazy, though, that he's already using this ability. Gerard's fight has barely begun. The timeline has really been changed up, and I have to imagine that Gerard's fight will be the main focus of episode 4. Now, Horn of Salvation's reveal felt a little odd to me, I will admit. There's really not much fanfare for it at all, and strangely it arrives in the middle of an episode when it feels like it's easily a big enough deal to be the cliffhanger, in my opinion anyway. And it does make me wonder, rather conspiratorially, if, as I said in a recent video, with this and the seeming downplaying of Ichigo's true bankai, with them spoiling it at every turn, is there maybe a new form for Ichigo incoming? But anyway, I think, I could be mistaken, I think the only footage in the trailers that we haven't yet seen is from when Ichigo rushes and attacks Yhwach immediately after transforming into this new form. So like I said, 3/4 of this core we have never seen, and that's very exciting. But yeah, that's, again, really all I have to say about this fight so far. This is another one that's really only just beginning and is probably going to be absolutely crazy by the end. The biggest takeaways here were the lore drops regarding the Soul King's power and Ichibe's schemes, and the huge character moment for Orihime, and I think that is something that people will really like. Before we wrap up this video, which is way too long, and before I lose my voice, I want to just very briefly go over some miscellaneous points. Chad and Ganju do face off against the statues, and that sequence is extended a little bit as expected. Honestly, I had to chuckle a bit, because where Chad rescues Ichigo and Orihime from a statue in the manga, punching the spear before it hits them, he now does so after Orihime has already raised her shield, so it's like, what was the point? In the manga, at least, that's like the last thing Chad ever does, and now it's been taken away from him, basically. The most interesting part of this whole sequence was the reveal, however, that Yhwach is animating the statues with his Soul King power. So that may end up being all that kind of comes of the whole Soul King Soldat thing. Another little point that I really loved was the return of Tessai, Jinta, and Uryu, none of who are seen in the manga version of this arc at all. Both of them are completely missing and are last seen in The Lost Agent. I really question what Tessai is doing in Karakura Town when I'm fairly sure someone could find a use for him, the former Kido Corps commander, in the battle, but at least we do get to see them again. And of course, they witness a spatial rift opening in Karakura Town, which is pretty cool, so everything really is falling apart around them. We don't see anything from Execution yet, there's no early sign of the Fullbringers, we don't see anything from Ukitake and Mimihagi at all in these episodes, and we don't see anything about Aizen just yet either. Alright, but I think that's it for my in-depth spoiler thoughts and impressions of the first 3 episodes of the 1000 Year Blood War Arc Core 4, The Calamity. Episode 1, or episode 41, is called God of Thunder, episode 2, or 42, is Son of Darkness, and episode 3, or 43, is Blood for My Bone. All of these, of course, are chapter titles from this period of the story, and again, it's really awesome to finally almost be here. Like I said, I came away very, very impressed, especially with episodes 1 and 2, which I thought looked flawless, but they're already teasing some pretty incredible changes and additions to the lore. Uryu versus Haschwalth is a completely new fight already. The Vizards were predictably disappointing. Hopefully we'll see more from them, but I'm not holding out too much hope. Yeah, so far, we're off to a very, very strong start, hitting the ground running. They're already covering so much. Like I said, we could be done with the manga by episode 10, leaving us maybe 3 or so episodes of totally new content. I've no idea. We're going to have to wait to find out. Unfortunately, there's still about a month to go until it starts, and I'll have already seen the first 3 episodes, which is a bit of a bummer. But like I said, I can't wait to watch them all again. I can't wait for a live discussion of those first 3. And of course, my in-depth spoiler manga versus anime reviews will all be coming out as they normally do. So I do hope you enjoy them. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. If you were lucky enough to watch the first 3 episodes, or if you just don't care about spoilers, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. How are you feeling about the start of Core 4? How are you feeling about everything I talked about in this video? Let's just do it like that. I'd love to get all of your thoughts. I'd love to read them, so do please let me know. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already, if you're new to the channel, if you just haven't hit that button yet. We are close to 300,000 subs. I'd love your help in getting there. It would be greatly appreciated. And like I said, I do put a lot of work into these videos. They do take me a while to script up and stuff like that to get all my thoughts down. So if you want to take your support that extra step further, check out the Patreon. I do greatly appreciate each and every one of you so very much. Alright guys, before I lose my voice, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.